Well, good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us today at the Rutgers PE and Employee Ownership Symposium. My name is Graham Thomas, and I sit in the Portfolio Operations Group within KKR, where I help lead our efforts to roll out broad-based ownership programs across our portfolio. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Colby Barrett, the Vice Chairman of GeoStabilization International, which is a company in our industrials portfolio that got to celebrate the fruits of their latest employee ownership journey last month. So, Colby, welcome. I'm excited for this conversation today.
Thanks, so am I, and welcome to everybody who's joining us virtually across the country. Employee ownership is really a cause that I care deeply about, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences about our particular journey at GSI.
Great. Before we dive in, do you want to just give us a little bit of context on who GSI is and what you guys do?
Yeah, that'd be great. So we're the largest geohazard mitigation service provider in North America. We focus primarily on roadway safety, keeping the traveling public safe from landslides, rock falls, debris flows. Recently, we've expanded that focus to include guardrail and other roadway safety services. And over the years, we've expanded our services to infrastructure like rail, energy, even commercial, some residential work. And we've also expanded into New Zealand, so gone international as well.
Amazing. I always love working with companies where the mission truly is to help save lives.
Right.
That's what you do.
Yes.
Um, and you've also have a unique personal history with geostabilization. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your journey into the CEO role and how the company has grown and developed since you first worked there over 20 years ago?
Absolutely. I like to say that I've held most of the positions in the company at one time or another. Back in October of 2004, I just finished up my time in the Marine Corps. So I'd led infantry and scout sniper platoons, but didn't really see that that was a lot of usable skills to go right into the civilian world. So I chose to go to graduate school, but I had about a year to kill before starting grad school. So I took a position as a laborer at GSI. It was a family company of ours. My father and another guy had started it. Super hard work, but so amazing to be able to see the restoration of roadway mobility. So you go and fix a landslide on a road, and the school buses and the ambulances pass again. It's just really neat. So midway through grad school, I was kind of eyeing being a corporate lawyer in Manhattan, or maybe coming back to GSI, and the choice was pretty easy. So myself and one of the other founders' sons ended up putting together a plan to take over the business in 2008. We had maybe 14 people, less than 10 million in revenues. By 2012, we'd grown exponentially. We brought in our first private equity investor at that point. That really helped us expand and professionalize. We started doing things like, strategic planning. We built a board of directors. We also started to experiment a little bit with some employee ownership. We probably had 5 or 10% employee ownership as of 2012. But what we saw with a lot of our previous PE group was really not a full understanding on what could be done with employee ownership. And so we were trying to figure out ways to get employees bought in. We actually had some of our buildings where the employees would come together and actually purchase the buildings and then lease those back to the company, just ways to kind of create some buy-in in the organization because there was a real hunger for it. By 2018, we were ready to take that next step of professionalization, and that's where we were looking for a new PE sponsor, and that's where we met KKR.
All right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I hadn't heard that about the buildings and
Yeah,
the creative way to get some employee ownership.
that's right.
So KKR comes in, launches an employee ownership program that covers 100% of the workforce, including the hourly workers. How did your team initially react, and how did did the employees understand what you're trying to do?
Right. Yeah, I think it's important to note first that the employee ownership concept that KKR brought to the table was really something that they stood out in our selection process for a new investor partner. because of that. There was really two things that jumped out at KKR. One is they're focused on employee safety. They actually knew the acronyms that we use in our industry. They knew the numbers on how we look at safety. So that was the first thing that impressed us with KKR. And the second piece was that concept of employee ownership. Like I mentioned, we've been trying to figure out whether this was possible for a long time, and kind of been told again and again that, yeah, it's a good thing, but it's too complex to get all the way through the organization. And what KKR said, yeah, it's complex, but it's solvable and it's totally worth the effort. So we did that. We set that up. We brought everybody together soon after we closed. KKR actually came out, Pete Stavros and Brandon Brom and others, and talked directly to our employees. And the reception was really good. But of course, it's a new investment group. It sounds a little bit too good to be true. So the initial reaction was, that's great. We love the concept. We shall see how this turns out. And we had a lot of trust in the organization. We have a good culture. So everybody wanted it to work and wanted to believe. But there was definitely a bit of a wait and see. Let's see if this is real.
What was that communication to employees like? How did you make it simple for everyone to be able to understand?
I think there's two things that we did a good job with, and KKR's really helped us steward this. Was when you first roll out the program, do it in person, talk to people directly, and don't skimp on the details. Yeah, you might not have an hourly laborer able to fully understand strike prices and options and these kind of things, but lay that out there, give them the information they need to evaluate these programs, and there's no reason to really dumb it down or anything like that. Get the information out there, because what you'll get is hopefully a good understanding of how the program works. But in any case, you get a sense that, hey, this is a group that's willing to invest in me as a worker here at GSI. And maybe I don't understand all the complexities of the program, but I see somebody's investing in me, somebody believes in me tangibly to make this happen.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Just in the signal it sends to have that level of
Right.
transparency and investment. Maybe before we get more into the implementation, we have a lot of practitioners on the call. They're going to be hearing about a lot of different forms of employee ownership. So can you elaborate just a little bit on how you guys structured the GSI plan and how it actually worked? Because I think in the private equity context and what we've done with these pool plans, it's a little bit different than something like an ESOP.
That's right. So typically, you'd see options granted to the most senior leaders in an organization, and we didn't do anything too far apart from that for our managers. So the first pillar of our plan was the management equity plan, and so what that was for salaried folks that had direct reports. So for those folks, you would set a target options value. So let's say if we hit our targets and we have a successful exit, we want Jim to get around $100,000 in options value. We would set up that plan and basically say that 5% of that expected options value was required as a stock investment. So for Jim in this case, he's a manager, he's got 5 direct reports. We grant him 100K in options value. He writes a check for 5K and buys that stock. So Jim's left with 5K in stock, common stock, and options that should be worth 100 grand. That was the management equity plan. On top of that, we had what was called a general pool. So those are for hourly folks, non-salaried folks primarily don't have direct reports. That's just a chunk of stock options that are put away for the benefit of those that group within the organization. I think a couple things to note here: none of these came at the expense of other benefits. So it wasn't like we didn't have a 401k plan or health insurance or those things. This was on top of that. And I think a lot of people would say, well, that's all great, but this is a new benefit. Who's paying for this? Um, Really, it's a dilution of the shareholders. And since KKR was our primary shareholder, there's some dilution there. But the thesis, and this is what we saw play out, and I think it's played out time and time again, is that dilution as an expense is more than made up with in terms of better company performance. So yeah, you're diluting, but you're getting all of that back and more in terms of increased company performance and other metrics that go right to bottom line. So everybody wins through that concept.
Yeah, and the evidence we're seeing is starting to become really compelling there. You guys were the 10th exit we've had, and I won't spoil the outcome just yet, but across those 10 exits now, we've seen an average of over 4x on the gross multiple of invested capital. Um, our net IRR has been north of 25% across those 10 deals. So it basically any measure you look at, even with the dilution of the extra employee options, it's been an extraordinary outcome for our LPs, the management teams, the employees, everyone involved. And you guys have just been one more company that has contributed to that track record. So
Yeah.
maybe backing up, how did you use this program and bring it to life and start to actually activate the equity over the course of the investment? And the reason I ask is one of the things we've seen is that if you just give people equity and you don't change anything in the day-to-day lived experience about how they're communicated to or listened to or invested in, you don't see any behavior change and you're very unlikely to get the value from it. Here we clearly got some value, so I assume there was some activation that happened. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think the three words that would jump out in terms of how to activate this is discipline, structure, and stories. So discipline, you have to communicate to your owners, which is the whole organization, on a regular basis. So what we did was at least quarterly ownership calls, and that would be the state of the business. We'd go through the numbers and really report on what was working, what wasn't, the same way you would report almost to a board of directors. That was the discipline of going through that. Structure is really important. So making sure that you accurately characterize the share price at certain intervals, that's on a platform that people can see it, and that all the mechanics are working there. So having the right structure on it, relatively easy to put together, but it's important to make sure that that's there along with the discipline so people understand this isn't something that we talked about back in 2019 and went away. This is a real ownership program that continues. And then stories, we're by nature, humans are shaped by our stories, like our values and our norms, and families are trying to get their kids to understand not to lie about danger. They tell them the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? And so the same thing here, we go in and we brief KPIs and we brief company valuation and the factors that go into it. But doing that through individual stories really brings that home. So if you want to make the point that better cash flow increases company valuation and that DSO is a critical part of cash flow, talk about how Jill in accounts receivable built an awesome relationship with a client and brought DSO down to this, and that's kind of flowing up to the overall organization. Those pieces, those individual stories of successes and how that affects the organization really resonate, and they're just a good thing to do. The other thing that we had here was a couple of years ago, I stepped back as CEO and took a role on the board. We brought in a gentleman named Dominic Ivankovich. He's fantastic and ran with those stories and that discipline. So that was nice to see in a leadership transition. We kept the discipline and the structure throughout, and that was a real big win for us.
Yeah, I love this idea of telling the stories to encourage the behaviors. One question people always have is, does this actually create value within the company? What are some of those stories and some of that evidence you saw that employees were thinking and acting differently once they became owners versus before then?
Yeah, if you just go straight to the the concept around what it meant for us in the kind of construction maintenance space, you'll see turnover rates around 40%. That's pretty normal. Um, we're seeing that more around like 17% right now. And the reason is it's just really logical. It's in the kind of common world now, it seems like, well, if I can get $1 an hour more over here, I should move. If I can get a little bit more experience over here, I should move. And so you see these really inefficient uh, job changes there. But the reason is that the companies that these folks are moving back and forth for aren't investing in them in the way that they should be. So when you create this employee ownership structure, it suddenly becomes logical to stay and build a career at an organization that's also investing back in you. So that's, it makes financial sense, and you can build that overall career at an organization that's also building on you. Other metrics, our total recordable incident rate went from 1.4, which is pretty good, down to 0.7. So that's cut in half. Our EBITDA tripled over the course of the hold period. Um, and then also one of the things I'm really excited about is our orders tripled. So as you look at indicators, seeing orders go up like that is a great outlook for the future. For me, I think one way I would look at it is to say, I did this transaction with three different private equity groups, right? So I had the proverbial three bites at the apple. The first time I did it with no employee ownership, I made X, right? I'm not going to share that number, but just use that as a gating point. We then moved to maybe 10% employee ownership with the next group. I made 1.3x, from the first bite. So 1.3 times better at bite number two. When we moved to 100% employee ownership, for me personally, 4.5 times as good as my first bite. And so, just when we talk about employee ownership, there's all these great reasons to do it from an employee point of view of it being the right thing to do, but the metrics along almost every single way you would cut it shows an outperformance. And I saw that personally in my own experience there.
That's great. Any stories of individuals where you saw that mindset shift really take hold and they thought about something differently or challenged the way they'd always done things because they were owners, and that directly contributed to some of these outcomes you're talking about?
Yeah, and I got to step back a little bit and kind of talk about the pillars of the employee ownership plan that I think sometimes don't get as much attention. So obviously, we've talked a little bit about how do you structure ownership and how do you make it work? How do you communicate that? That's obviously key, but KKR had two more that were on here. And now, after seeing the program work, I really understand why those were there. So the first is investing in the workforce, and then the next is investing in the community. And at first glance, it's like, well, those are good things to do, but how does that relate to employee ownership? They're really harmonious for the overall program. So, I mentioned when KKR first came in, any PE buyout of any company is going to create the random stories there of like, well, my cousin's company got bought out and they cut and slashed and all these kind of bad things, right? So everybody's kind of on guard when PE comes in, even when it's the second or third or
Sure.
fourth PE group. And so when you saw KKR came in, they came in with mandates that certain funds be spent to make the workforce safer and more comfortable. Like this was, and that got a lot of attention. So one of our examples was we shoot a lot of what's called shotcrete. So it's we're spraying concrete on unstable slopes. There's a lot of pressures involved there, so it can be kind of a higher risk operation. With KKR, we invested in robots that actually shoot some of our shotcrete, which takes the person out of the line of fire, so to speak, a lot safer. We did a lot of upgrades to facilities and these kind of things. And that attention then comes in where we see that, hey, the ownership team, the ownership group here cares about us and wants to invest in safety and these kind of things. Then we also partnered with community organizations. We worked with Team Rubicon, which is a disaster response group founded by veterans like myself, as well as Camp Southern Ground. I think then that those stories, those concepts start to get people to say, well, maybe this group's different. Maybe we should stop being so skeptical about the role of PE in the organization. And so when you start seeing this, it also creates kind of a culture within the organization. And so when we bring in new hires that we're interviewing to see if they're a fit, we talk about, hey, employee ownership. We're big on that. We're big on community involvement and investing in the workforce. If those kind of messages don't really resonate with folks we're interviewing, they're probably not going to be a cultural fit at all. And if they do resonate, you have an outsized advantage in recruiting. So I can tell you, Dominic, I mentioned our new, well, not new now, but our CEO that's led us through this transition and into the next PE group. I think that was one of the big reasons we were able to convince him to come and lead GSI. He wasn't looking to just run a company. He wanted to make an impact. And so there's strategic advantages there around the overall ownership plan in general.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you touched on it a bit earlier, but just a fantastic outcome all around, right? Quit rate down 50%, safety down 50%, EBITDA tripled, and a 5x plus return for the investors, which meant significant returns for the employees as well. I know that outcome was all the sweeter because a few weeks ago, you actually got to share the news with every GSI employee about what this exit meant to them when
Right.
KKR sold the business to Leonard Green Partners. So let's go ahead and actually watch some of those highlights together, and then we'll.
Great, let's do it.
It's a very special day for everybody in this room and the other 800 people around the organization.
Big news is we have sold the business to a great new partner.
GSI was founded in the concept of protecting people and infrastructure from the dangers of geohazards. Anything that would protect the traveling public.
The net profits of this business since 2018 are up almost threefold.
And the bottom line is that we are better than ever before able to serve our customers and protect the public.
Huge round of applause for all of you. Thank you for everything that you've done.
All right, so what does that mean for all of you as owners?
So for our newest colleagues who just joined this year, the payout is $10,000.
I think my jaw kind of dropped. And I was like, if the first year is like 10,000, like what is the second year gonna be?
If you joined in 2023, you will receive a payout of $20,000.
Oh my God, 2 years, I'll be here 11.
If you joined in 2014 through 2018, you will receive a minimum payout of $175,000.
These are folks who have been with the business more than 10 years. So you joined GSI in 2013 or earlier. The payout is $275,000.
My goodness. I mean, I was kind of shocked, because I never had that much money in my life.
Plus the 2 additional payouts, those apply to this cohort as well, so it's $325,000.
With that money, I can get better future. It means really a lot to me now.
When you tell an employee, we value you, and then they turn around and actually show that, it was astonishing.
people's lives changed to hear it today. I'm like excited for them, just like I'm excited for me.
When you add the ability to really say, look, you're an owner, you have an actual financial stake, not just in collecting your paycheck, but the performance of the company, it just takes that to another level.
Dreams that people possibly didn't even know they had can now become a reality because of what was done today.
God, I have this money for my daughter because I just had her 2 months ago, so it's just a blessing.
For me, I think it was life-changing. I was thinking a lot about my family.
It fundamentally is both good business and it's the right thing to do.
I've only been here since April, and to have the company recognize me, that's just incredible. Like, it could be life-changing.
I think that this movement gives an opportunity for people to work with purpose, to work with an intent.
Today was an event and a milestone and a very significant one. And now let's go do it all again.
Everybody's voice counts. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that we would have a program where we could grow the way that we've grown. This is just the start.
Such a cool moment and so powerful to hear it from the employees. What was that event like for you personally, Colby, when you were there a couple weeks ago?
Just so overwhelming. When you look and say, well, I'm gonna go invest in a career, like what do you want to take away from that? And of course, financial security and healthy retirement and all these kind of things, but I don't know that those are the things you reflect on in your career. First, did you create real good along the way for those that you served in the world? And at GSI, we're fixing roadways and saving lives there, so that one's a check. But the second piece is, are you doing it in a way that comes at the expense of your people, or you're doing it in a way that really strengthens them throughout that? And this really brought that last factor home. We've got long-term folks that were in their administrative team taking home checks for $325K. It changed lives and it changed paradigms. I think the total was over 75 million paid out to over 900 people, and just some of the most deserving folks you could ever imagine. Two of the stories, and they're just starting to come in now of how these impacts have started to shape folks. But one gentleman had been working really hard at GSI, and every dollar he had, he was paying to his grandparents to buy their family land. So he was, just intent on keeping this big chunk of land in the family, and it was all he could do to make that happen. And unfortunately, his grandfather just recently passed away, but he called me and was just so proud that he was going to go soon after the funeral and be able to pay that last check to his grandmother and keep that land in the family. Another gentleman had called up, and what we found out was he was living in rental housing and having some issues with his landlord. So there were some questions about whether he's going to be able to stay in that house. But with this check that he was going to get, he not only was putting a down payment down on his own house, he was also entering for the first time a retirement plan through it. He was actually in Canada, but it's their RRSP. It's like our 401k. So this guy went from renting a house that was a little bit unstable to being a homeowner with a retirement account. And that, I don't know whether I'm sure there's bigger paradigm shifts in people's lives, but those are big ones. And so just hearing those stories is so cool that I get to leave this position, this role with GSI with great financial rewards, and that's awesome. But also this legacy of good that we've done in the world, and then that concept that has went through all our employees. And then the thing that's probably the sweetest is Leonard Green is taking over from KKR, but they're putting together a similar plan as well. So you've got this amazing continuance of this legacy of employee ownership that just, you couldn't script a better way to step back from an organization than what happened just a little while back.
Yeah, I'm excited to follow the story and see what happens next. To have this kind of outcome and then realize we can go do it all again, it's got to be powerful. And
Yes.
it'll be fun to watch. Look, I know that it wasn't a linear road to get here, and this was your first journey with employee ownership. So I'm sure there are some mistakes that were made along the way, and if you could go back, some things you would do differently. What are some of those lessons learned you'd have for future leaders trying to implement shared ownership and activate the program?
I think there's there's two things. First, we of course made some mistakes, but they're pretty few and far between and pretty fixable. Some stuff I would say that we could have done different is better quantifying the value of the general pool. So when we brought everybody in, we said, hey, if we hit our targets, this will probably be worth around 6 months of salary. Ended up being for some people like 6 years of salary. But I guess if you're gonna get it wrong a certain way, that's the best way to do it. The other thing is, don't be too hard on yourselves on making sure everybody understands every single detail of the program. Like, get the message out there, be deliberate about it, have your heart in the right place. But if not everybody understands what a strike price is and how option structures work when you're done, that's okay. You're not striving for perfection. You want to do the best you can with a plan, communicate the best you can, but don't really get too overwhelmed on the details. The last thing I would say, if you're trying to replicate this, and Brandon Brom had talked about this in the video, it's the right thing to do. So from a moral perspective, this has a lot of benefits, but put that totally aside. Just from a company performance point of view, the stats and the logic behind this really lend credence to this as a real strategic mechanism of outperformance. And I would say too, the time that you put into the program, so communicating with the folks that are part of it, how it works, talking about ownership calls and these kind of things. This is all stuff that is good for the organization in general, right? So better cultural alignment, better communication. These things make you stronger even without the employee ownership. So yeah, there's a few extra spreadsheets, but everything else, the work and the time that you put into it, you get that back many times over in intangible benefits across the board.
Yeah, we've seen that time and again. It's a bit of a Trojan horse for general best practices.
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
well, thank you, Colby, for being here. I know we're coming up on the end of our time. I just want to end by saying the work that you guys did and the outcome you had at GSI is fueling a broader movement in the private equity space, which is really exciting. And so for those who aren't aware, there's a nonprofit organization called Ownership Works that a number of private equity firms, including both KKR and Leonard Green, helped start up. And they're spreading the shared ownership movement more broadly. And there's now over 100 private equity-backed companies that have similar schemes to this. Within KKR alone, we now have over 50 of these broad-based ownership programs, and over 20 of those have been launched in the last 12 months. So we've had a huge acceleration in our ability to create this opportunity for other people. And a lot of that is, because of outcomes like GSI and what you guys were able to achieve and pave the way to prove, to your point, this can be an amazing opportunity for employees. It can also help create better returns for the LPs who are counting on us to fund their own retirements and drive things forward. So thanks for your time, Colby. Thanks for all that you invested in this, and congratulations on a great outcome.
Yeah, and I would echo that back. Thanks to KKR and Leonard Green and all the private equity firms that have jumped into this. If you look at what this meant for us, if you start scaling that, 900 people that are now financially secure, you start scaling that across the private equity universe and beyond. It's a meaningful impact for our nation, and it's really cool to see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Colby, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.